Awesome. Shiv, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Excited for the conversation. We're going to be talking about growth stage hiring in particular today. We've had a few interesting conversations on this already, in particular, finding top talent within that high growth environment. So we're going to talk a bit about identifying the talent, why that talent is maybe attracted to growth stage businesses, and then hiring for different stages of growth. So maybe some useful context to start would be the last couple of hiring environments you've been in, which are super interesting. So give us a bit of background and information on those.
So, I've spent my whole career in recruitment, but my first foray into the mad world of hypergrowth startups was with Multiverse. So, joined them just after they'd raised their Series B. It was a really steep learning curve. During the time that I was there, we did 2 funding rounds, we got unicorn status, we made 400 hires in a year, and it was brilliant. And I loved it. And I learned so much from that experience. I then wanted to take all of those learnings and work with earlier stage founders to really help them build their founding go-to-market teams. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 2.5 years. And at the moment, I've actually gone all in with MetaView as they're entering a period of hypergrowth.
Awesome. I think most people listening to this in the TA world probably know MetaView, so it'll be quite useful context for them to anchor this conversation to. Tell us a bit about what top talent actually means in these kind of high growth environments then.
Yes, it's a very difficult question to answer. I think the term A player is used far too much now. We used it a lot at Multiverse, but because it's used so much in so many different contexts, it's really lost its meaning. Um, and I also think it sort of gives off this "you can't sit with us" vibe. However, working in an early stage or growth stage startup where you're VC backed is really challenging. You know, you're innovating or vying for first mover advantage for market share, and you've got investors kind of breathing down your neck to meet certain growth milestones. And so that's a very challenging environment for anyone to work in. And so it is really important to get clear on what sort of individual is going to thrive in that environment. And there's quite a lot of data actually out there that supports this. McKinsey did a study a while ago on the relationship between top talent and performance and found that in complex, challenging roles, high performers are 800% more productive than their peers. There's also another study, which I can't remember where I think I listened to it on a podcast, around how high performers bring the bar up of their peers by 30%. And so I think when you're hiring for an early stage business, you're really looking to assemble those force multipliers that are going to drive your business forward in a way that other people just can't, because that's not what they're attracted to. They're not going to thrive in that environment.
Yeah, A players is definitely an interesting term, and there's a lot of people who take issue with it, I think, especially when it appears in job descriptions like this kind of VC language that probably trickles down a little bit. But you're exactly right. There's a layer behind it, and there's a reason why we're looking for these folks in the first place. Why is it? Let me rephrase that question. Like, why would someone who has these traits be attracted to an earlier stage business?
Yeah, I like to think about this as a bit of a Venn diagram. So you've got the give and the get. And then in the middle of that, you've got these individuals that can thrive in that environment. So we know that working in these environments, it's challenging work, it's pace, it's problem solving, it's working through ambiguity, it's workload. You're never going to hire at the pace that you need to. And so it's always kind of slightly under resourced. But what attracts this talent is that challenging work. It's the opportunity for growth. It's a really clear mission and innovation. It's working alongside exceptional individuals that are going to bring your bar up. And therefore, it's career acceleration that you're just not going to get in a steady state business. And that's what these individuals are attracted to.
Then probably a more difficult question is, how do you find and assess them, right? Because I'm going to say 90% of CVs probably say they like working in a fast-paced environment. High agency is a great phrase, but how do you actually assess for something like that?
Okay, so I think this is really challenging, particularly when you think about the numbers that you need to make one hire. So, for example, at Multiverse, we had a top of funnel of 60,000 to make 400 hires. So you're looking at around 150 candidates through applied, through source to make one hire. With the earlier stage businesses that I'm working with, that is a lot higher. You're looking at maybe 300 to 1. And that's a huge time investment if you don't get really clear really quickly on how great shows up for your business from LinkedIn profile, CV, first screen, and so on. So, for example, at the moment, I'm looking for candidates that have got or that can evidence rate of learning, winning trajectory, i.e., a pattern of achievement, and growth mentality. So, that real hunger to learn combined with the nature to really seek out and take feedback, even when it's tough. And so, like I say, you need to be able to qualify that on a LinkedIn and a CV. So maybe you're looking at individuals that have got experience already thriving in these challenging environments, that have got evidence in sales of overattainment. Also, they might have crafted a really well presented CV. From there, I think it's about building a robust and additive interview process that not only assesses for those characteristics that you've identified and obviously kind of hard skills, but actually also reflects the environment that they're going to be stepping into. So, for example, if we think about critical thinking at pace, are you asking questions where you're going 3, 4, 5 layers deep to really test someone? Are you creating an interview that is quite challenging so that you can actually test for someone's aptitude and resilience? Because lots of candidates say that they're resilient, but you need to really push them and see how it shows up. And that is also a balancing act because you're also trying to sell at the same time. So it's switching between this kind of positive sell mode and then having to shift gears really quickly into quite sort of assertive probing, which is not easy.
Do you think this kind of pool you're talking about, do they actually prefer it if the interview process is a bit harder? Do you think it'd be a negative signal for them if they're not getting probed in the interview?
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's from my experience, it's the candidates that come out and are like, wow, that was awesome. I have never been pushed so much. Even if I don't get the job, I'm so grateful for that experience. So yes, I do think it's very telling. The challenge is that they are in the minority. And from an employer brand perspective, if you're not intentional about kind of bookending each of these stages with like positivity, it can have a really detrimental impact on your Glassdoor, on your brand, which is a challenge for a talent team.
Yeah, I guess the added difficulty there is there's some signals that you mentioned, like maybe overachievement on quota or fast pace of promotions, things like that, right? But it's probably quite hard to identify in sourcing if they're this kind of character or not until you get them into the interview. And then if you bring someone who's not that kind of character into an interview and then you grill them, for want of a better phrase, like that probably then does leave that negative experience for what they were expecting from an interview process.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, with quota attainment, it's also challenging because evidence of smashing quota in a scale up is not a predictor of success in an early stage business because there's so much more ambiguity. It's not about applying a playbook. And so actually sometimes you might meet with a candidate that hasn't met quota, but the environment that they were in was so challenging that actually what they did is much more interesting than the person over here that was smashing quota in that, Series C playbook business.
Yeah, an interesting point. Would you say there are any other differences, both in maybe the candidates you're looking for and how you work it internally for a, let's say, seed stage organization to a Series C scale up?
It's interesting because it's quite often it's the same terminology that we're thinking about here, whether it's kind of intelligence, character, or coachability, which were the words that we were using at Multiverse, and we're using slightly different ones now, but saying the same thing. But I think, for example, if you think about coachability within the context of a more established scale up, there's a larger team around you. There's quite a clearly defined playbook, and therefore coachability in that context centers more around individuals that are really hungry to learn and then apply those learnings, kind of make small tweaks for incremental gains. Whereas if you think about coachability in the context of an early stage startup, you need to put much more of an emphasis on it because, for example, in sales, you need your sales people to be deeply curious about who they're selling to and then evolve their approach to sales and then build out a scalable motion alongside doing all of that testing, iterating, which you just don't need to do when you've got an established playbook.
Where does this go wrong in terms of retention? Is it where there's like a misalignment to this maybe high performance environment that you're selling and then they come into it and maybe everyone they're working with is not a high performer? Where can this go wrong?
I think it's about being really real from the outset. And like I say, that interview process is going to do some of the legwork there. I think ultimately this kind of talent is attracted to the rate of learning and that career acceleration. And the reality is most startups fail, or they might be on a high growth journey and then things have changed and, they don't get that Series B, Series C funding. And therefore the pace of growth changes. And I don't really think there's much you can do about that. You can't really retain that kind of talent because that's not the environment that's right for them. I would also say on that this is why it's so important to get hiring right, particularly at the early stage, because if you think about a business of 20 people and the percentage of one hire and the impact that that person has on your business, these, like I say, you're creating a team of force multipliers that more than the sum of their parts. And if you start sort of compromising for good versus great, that will have an impact on the wider team. It will bring performance down and it will create a different environment, and that one that you risk losing talent. So it's very important to get it right from the start.
Just to pick up on one thing you mentioned earlier, which I think would be interesting for folks on the top of funnel, like you mentioned how that changes from early stage to scale up, right? And the top of funnel to high ratio was massive at the early stage. Why does that shift, and how did TA sort of adopt their approach as it shifts?
When you're later stage, you're clearer, or you should be clearer on kind of how great shows up. And I guess I'm talking about both hard skills, but really soft skills as important. And so the talent team has got more data, historical data to think about, like, how do we feed that early in our screenings? And so we know that candidates are going to move through the process. And I think when I've led talent teams in the past, the data point that I am most interested in from their perspective is that HM1 to HM2, because if you've got a good proportion of candidates going through there, you know that you're kind of nailing it from a screening perspective. And then later down the line, you want to be working really closely with your hiring managers and leaders to figure out why are candidates falling down at the final stage and how can we feed that back in earlier. And I think that's really challenging, actually, particularly with technical hiring, because it's that balance between, do we test for characteristics first and then find out that they're not technically competent, or vice versa? And then I think for earlier stage, the challenge is you don't have loads of data. So you don't actually know what it takes here to get to here. And so then you have to sort of look at pass-through rates and work backwards from that. And really just, again, working as a team to figure out how can we learn fast about how great shows up. And I have to say, one thing that I have found so helpful about using MetaView when hiring at MetaView is that we're able to watch interviews back, really learn together, look at, create templates against the things that we're looking for and learn really quickly so that we are ruling people in and out much faster and protecting the time of the team.
Who do you learn from in this space? What are some companies or maybe even thought leaders who have done this kind of hiring really well, and there's some kind of playbook we can learn from?
Oh my gosh, that is a really good question. I'll tell you who I learn really well from. I've got a micro community of early stage, like TA leaders, all kind of standalone, first in, doing the strategy, doing the hiring. And I find that I learn so much from those peers because TA is changing so quickly now, particularly with AI, that it's really helpful to kind of be in the weeds with these individuals and figure out like who's doing what, who's building what. Beyond that, I really enjoy listening to podcasts. Listened to a really great podcast recently. It was with Knuckle from Audacious Ventures, really talking about kind of this war for talent. So I'd say it would be a combination of learning from peers and podcasts.
Yeah, I was also wondering, are there any companies historically who've done this really well? And the place my mind goes to that is there are these certain companies and they have a real massive percentage of ex-employees who go on to be founders, right? I think the first one everyone talks about is the PayPal mafia, and now I think Revolut has a really high percentage of ex-employees which become founders. And in my mind, if they had those kind of entrepreneurial, fast-paced people in their organization, there must have been something about the company and their hiring process to be able to attract those people in the first place.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that I'm doing at the moment from a sourcing perspective is like logging down companies that have got a high talent density. Think that I don't know this because I haven't spoken to the talent leaders in those space, but I do just think it comes down to getting really clear early on what great looks like, making sure it's really simple, that everyone's talking the same language, and that you're laser focused on hiring great people.
Perfect. So I think that's some very focused advice to end with. So we'll cut it there. Shiv, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.